Hey guys, so I'm gonna do another one of these episodes, and this is one I kind of haven't really wanted to do that much, but I figure I should just because it's a pretty common paintball gun. Mine's pretty neat, and despite the fact that it's pretty common and it's cheap, it's actually not a bad little gun. So the gun that I have here today is an Invert Mini. This is the limited edition Storm version of the Invert Mini that was sold in 2012, I believe. So this would make it a Gen 3 Mini. Invert Minis were introduced in, I believe, around 2009. And when they were first introduced, they had this problem with the poppet and the solenoid, I think, where basically they were just unreliable. They weren't very consistent. They just sucked. They broke. Gen 2s were a little bit better, but again, same kind of problems with the poppet and the solenoid, and eventually they broke. And the Gen 3s is when they really ironed out how to make these things. And the way it works is kind of mind-blowing. I don't really understand exactly how it works, but basically it's, let's see if I can hold it like this. As you can see, I've got the clear grip panels on here and the Axe ASA. So when you flip this switch, the gun pressurizes. Air travels up this tube. It goes through a series of manifolds, I guess you could call it, that distribute the air through the solenoid and into a kind of poppet valve that's here, that then has a long rod that the bolt sits on, and that rod has a bunch of holes and O-rings on it, and somehow when you pull the trigger, the solenoid does something that causes that poppet to move and fire the gun. I'm not exactly sure how it does it, but it is a poppet valve gun. One of the things with Invert Minis is that if after you use them for a certain amount of times, since the poppet is so tiny and so plastic, it will start to get nicks in it. And if it starts to get nicks in it, you'll find that the gun won't be as consistent. It won't shoot as nicely as it used to, and that's time to replace the poppet. Another thing you need to make sure you do is seal this back cap appropriately. I find that is the #1 cause of leaks when I pressurize my Mini. It's holding air right now. Another thing you want to make sure you do is keep your O-rings fresh. And by fresh, I don't mean greased up. I mean you want to make sure you've got new O-rings on here all the time. This thing runs on the O-rings. If the O-rings are getting worn, it will start to drop velocity. It'll start to become inconsistent. Might start bouncing on you a little bit. What else? That's really all I can think of in terms of things that can go wrong with. Oh, don't dry fire this. Don't click the solenoid. The way this solenoid works is actually different from other solenoids, and I didn't realize it until I got this Virtue board installed. It has 2 dwell settings. It's got the on dwell and the off dwell. And the off dwell is substantially lower than the on dwell. And the reason for that is because this solenoid was built in a way where it is designed to work with the air pressure to open and close the valve. So if when this thing's pressurized, it needs, a fair amount of energy to open the solenoid so that the air can move out, but then it needs to send a second signal to the solenoid to close the solenoid. And it's just kind of weird for one of these. I mean, most of the time they just click, right? This goes in and then pushes itself back up. Maybe I'm doing a bad job of describing it, but with this, if you dry fire this, you can actually end up drawing, the board will realize, whether you've got the stock board or the Virtue board, it will realize that it's not closing so easy, so it'll start to drain more amperage out of the battery. And not only will you drain the battery faster, but you could also dump too much energy into the solenoid and fry your solenoid, or just make it really unresponsive. So I've tried to limit my dry firing of this. I am going to dry fire it for you guys just because this thing is fucking ridiculous. Not only do I have the clear grips on here, I just found the stock grips a little bit too bulky. I've got the Ahhh ASA because I found the stock ASA was just really hard to crank the air supply in and out. I put a Violent Series trigger on there, and this is the trigger pull. This is a Delrin ball bearing trigger. The stock trigger it comes with is basically a piece of folded sheet metal that they then screw onto the frame with no bearings. You might notice I've got this little snatch grip here, which does work. There's my other hand. Where is it? There it is. There's my other hand. It is actually working as a snatch grip. I also have this foregrip extender on there. Both of those are made by a company named Numech Industries, N-U-M-M-E-C-H. Nice guys, expensive, but you know, that's some pretty cool stuff. It's got the Virtue OLED board in there. It has a CCM no-rise feed neck. And I've also got a New Designs Delrin V2 bolt in there, which from the reviews had the best reviews out of any bolt you could get for the Invert Mini. Let me tell you this, the stock bolt works the best. When you start getting other bolts, you need to really think about what you want to go for. Do you want to go for a high rate of fire? Do you want to go for consistency? Do you want to go for efficiency? Because you're going to need to configure your gun specifically to that with one of those super light bolts, because they don't do everything really well. The stock bolt does everything really well. Those aftermarket bolts will do one thing even better, but everything else won't be as good. So I'm going to try and insert a picture of the second highest rate of fire I ever got. The highest rate of fire I ever got was, I think, about 1 ball per second faster than the picture I'm going to show you, or might be showing you right now. But I did that on the field. And when I took this picture, it was in my basement and I had my phone on hand. So this is with the stock bolt in there. I'm just gonna give you a little demonstration. Actually, why don't I'll show you what it's like to turn it on. It's kind of neat. Oh, let me get that. Oh, you can't even see it. That sucks. Oh, it's a good thing I've got such a great camera. Anyways, so it is currently set in auto response. I'm going to turn the eyes off. Eyes are off. It's an auto response. This is with the stock bolt with the stock spring kit. I do have the New Designs bolt with the New Design spring kit, and it's not in here right now. Listen. So that registered 25 cycles per second. It will shoot that. It will shoot that. It was probably shooting a little faster than that. Maybe not. When you turn the eyes off, the board will only register a certain BPS, and it registers up to 25 balls per second. When you leave the eyes on, for whatever reason, the board will register the actual BPS if it goes beyond 25 balls a second, which is how I got that reading that I'm probably going to flash again right now. Which I think makes it even more incredible that the eyes were on when I shot it that fast. So Invert Mini, for some reason, the Storm costs like $70 more, or the limited edition costs $70 more. They're decent little guns. They have problems. You know, they run on the O-rings. This ASA is always coming loose just because of the way it screws in. It just shakes itself loose after a little while, which all ASAs do, but this is badder. This is worse. I was having an issue where the velocity was dropping off, but it seems to have fixed itself. It's very temperamental with how you grease it up. If you put too much grease, it won't work properly. If you put too little grease, it won't work properly. If you put the wrong kind of grease in the wrong areas, it won't work properly. So I use a very, very light grease for the bolt. I use the dye slick lube or whatever the frig it's called. The dye slick grease. I don't know. It's dye grease. It was like $15 for a tube that big. It's fuck you dye. And I use Virtue V6 or Tectique Gun Save at the back. Just, you know, where there are moving parts, you want to use the very light grease, and where there are seals that you want to make that don't move, that's where you want to use the heavy grease. So, yeah, you know, this gun's kind of fun to play with. It's also kind of not fun. Shooting it it's a little soulless when you pull the trigger. I don't know why. It might be the magnetic trigger that just gives that kind of disconnect between what you're telling it to do and what it's doing. It's kind of like having a turret mounted on your shoulder. You just point it and you click and it just goes. And it kind of has a mind of its own. But it's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. It wasn't expensive. This is 2 years old now. I mean, it works perfectly. I've put a lot of paint through it, and it's all been at high rates of fire. I've really never had an issue with this gun at all. They give you a giant toolkit when you buy the gun. And yeah, I've really had nothing but good experiences with it. Oh, cold weather. Does not like cold weather. The solenoid freezes. I think the sheath of the solenoid is a different type of metal than the solenoid pin that actually goes up and down. So the solenoid will bind itself shut in the cold weather. Now, granted, I was playing in weather that was, I think the warmest it ever did that was -18, and the coldest it ever did it was like -28 or -30. But that's the coldest game I've ever played in, and I tried to play with this. Aside from that, yeah, it's good. You know, people rag on them because they're cheap electros, but if you know what you're doing, you'll get a lot of people out. It's just once you start using the good electros, the real good ones, you kind of realize why this is cheap. And it's, aside from saying what I've already said, it's kind of hard to describe. So yeah, this is Invert Mini. Keep shooting, guys. Have fun.